Yeah, well, that's why I walked up there. It was like, it's been around 10 when the parade started yesterday. So like, all the people were at the parade. I walk up, I'm like, oh, the guys are going to follow the line that we can see the nose. And I was like, there's no way it's wrapped around the middle. Oh, okay. See, I started on the first floor. So when it said it's 4 floors, I tried to hit all the floors, and I never got past the first floor.
But I got back in it. Don't miss your page.
Oh, right. Yeah, probably so many people don't make it up that high. I did. I never get made it past the first floor. So I got it. I'm going on culture around 5. Oh, that's not too bad. When I was there at 10 a.m. yesterday, but that's great. It took me maybe an hour to get in. It just wasn't that bad. So, I'll be kicked out later. What's it close? 5? What time? 7. Oh. I probably spent 2 hours on the first floor alone. And then I got it. They want us to be all day there. I want us to be all day. So I'm like, I got 2 hours. Hopefully you're going to get in. Stuff there, people are like, let's go. That's what I'm planning on doing. Usually when we go there, I expected to not really kind of care. I really just like I was hoping top notch. He's awesome at following the years. One day I asked him about both of them. Girls book 120 years ago or something. Yeah. Yeah, no. And so, but everything there was so good. This guy's super cool. And like talking to everyone, he's on a panel. About like creating art and how to deal with it. Publishing industry and stuff like that.
I didn't get stuck.
I didn't expect to like it much.
We're going. Hello and welcome to Fantasy Track. I am your moderator, Boyce, and I don't know what I'm doing. No. So welcome to Swords. Let me read the actual description of this. I forgot.
Swords and sorcery, awesome combat.
Yeah, swords and sorcery.
That's cool as magic.
They told me I was moderating yesterday. It's great. So we're talking about swords and fantasy and magic and all of the fun things that you can do with weapons and magic combined. So, first off, remember, David's not doing the things. David, come tell about the charity. Oh, you did. You already did all the things. Okay, great. All right, well, you guys know that. I will leave time at the end for questions. Please make sure that are questions, not comments. Let's start with introducing everyone. Go to Jim.
Yeah, I'm both. I'm Rose Reynolds. I write as TJ Reynolds and Atlas Kane, if you like the bad stuff. Yeah, I'm online. That's it.
I'm Bryce O'Connor. I'm best known as the author of the Iron Prince, Stormreaver series. I also have a doctorate in physical therapy, so I basically have a higher degree in musculoskeletal systems, which means that please don't record this because it was 7 years ago and I am going to screw something up so bad in this conversation.
I'm Nicoli, Gonnella, and I write Unbound, the Glitter RPG series, and that's all.
And I'm JC Kang. I write epic fantasy, usually with an Asian twist to it. I am an acupuncturist by trade, but I also teach Wing Chun Kung Fu. I've done some boxing, wrestling, basically things I get hurt at. And I'm a sword. Store. Okay.
And yeah, so I'm Boyce. I write the RPG too. You can look at me on things. I'm getting magnets, whatever. So, first off, I'm going to ask, what is your guys' combining magic with weapons? Like, what is your favorite thing to do with magical weapons?
We're appropriating another author who's awesome. The great Davis Ashura.
Davis Ashura!
You're there.
Famous and professional.
Davis Ashura is coming
Many
onto this
best-selling
channel as well
titles.
because we love him. And,
Also, I hear you know things about the human body.
and he might know things about fighting and magic.
Thank you, Jake. Sorry, Jake.
Good.
Prep.
All right, so I guess,
You get the first question.
Introduce yourself, Davis.
well, I'm Davis Ashura. I write epic fantasy novels and showed up here, spur of the moment, and I guess I get to be on a panel.
Surprise. All right, Davis, what is your favorite thing about combining magic with weapons?
And I get the first question. My favorite thing about combining weapons with magic, is that the question?
Yeah, because this is a magical weapons channel.
Oh, okay. So it's kind of fun to think about what happens to the human body. I know that's kind of gruesome.
He's a doctor, by the way.
When weapons impact flesh, or even just injuries occur from any of those impacts. But in terms of Jesus Christ, this is a hard question.
All right, John, go.
No, guys, the human body is a really good start.
That's a
something
very
I-
good start. I'll give you time to think about my answer too. So.
Sometimes it's interesting because you think, well, how long is this going to person bleed out with an injury, depending on where they're cut. And I think about those kind of things, or what if they're instantly cauterized? How long is it going to be before they have infection? And then what happens if the magic is necrotic? And so you can play around with lots of different ideas of what happens to characters who are injured. At least I do, with these weapons. And sometimes you just want them to die really fast. So you think, all right, what kind of weapon can they use? I mean, obviously, light them up with a fireball and incinerate them quickly, or make your sword like a lightsaber and just cut them without any, with their armor not stopping anything. So I just like figuring out what I want that weapon to do and why I want it to do it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
Good job.
I'm assuming most of you played Dungeons and Dragons or something similar.
Yeah.
And so, once upon a time, again, sword plus 3. And you kind of wonder, what makes that sword plus 3? And so you sometimes think maybe a wizard enchanted it, or maybe it was made of a special metal. And so these are all kind of considerations I take into account. It's instead of it just being a sword, I don't do lit RPG or anything like that, but if there's a certain weapon, in my mind I'm thinking that's a sword plus 3, or a flaming sword plus 3. So that's one way I would look at it. Or some that increase your physical speed when you're fighting, or give you extra defense.
Sword health plus 1.
Mine is always a consideration of how the magic and the sword kind of inform each other, or weapon rather. Because different weapons have different functions, so magic interacts with that. How does that change that function, and how it's being used as a weapon? Actual range, how it's also make it easier to hurt someone or whatever, and kind of interplay between them is what I found most interesting.
I'm really glad you guys answered with all the hard answers, because I get to be like, yeah, I agree with all that, and I get to say, I get to make my weapons light up, and they go. But in all seriousness, from a writing and aesthetic perspective, making your scenes look good and feel good is just as important as making them accurate. So the fact that I can literally tell my characters that they have lightsabers without using the word lightsaber is an important aspect of the aesthetics of the characters and what those weapons and armor do.
I think the serious answers will be coming from that side of the panel. Just so we all know that the bullshit's here. It'll be fun though.
You're stuck between all of them.
I was going to say craft-wise, writing with magic weapons, let's just be lazy. You could be like, well, how does that weapon system work? And you're like, well, it has an enchanted crystal. And it goes, shoot. Right? But you also shouldn't be too lazy. You should do your due diligence, right? I think it's cool to link fun weapon magic systems to your overarching universe magic system. don't do that, you're kind of being too lazy.
One of the other things I'm going to play off what Nicoli said is, depending on the weapon, you're going to have certain distance control, and I always think about distance control, like if you're unarmed, you have certain distances, how fast can your gap get out there? If you have a sword, how long is your reach? Spear, same thing, bow and arrow. And so one of the things I like to think about is if you're wondering about distance control, how does the magic extend your distance control so that you achieve something that's unexpected?
Which literally goes into my question is, how do you balance melee and ranged weapons with magic?
With magic?
Like, what kind of challenges does that specifically create for you guys?
I have, in my opening paragraph, I just say, it doesn't work. I literally have that in like 400 years ago, like projectiles just stopped working because for me it's science magic. I technically write a sci-fi series, but it's literally their reactive fielding just stop making projectile stuff work. So going to lazy writing, sometimes it works out okay. I don't recommend it as like the go-to though, but you can make it work.
No projectiles for Bryce.
I wrote really cool projectiles. So, I'll just talk about that. I made like, sort of like the main country in this that sort of, they're like base primitive cultivators. They haven't fully ascended yet, they don't know that. But there's like wind mages that ride on horseback and shoot arrows. But because they can empower their arrows with wind magic, they get to shoot arrows that weigh like 5 times as much and have massive bodkin arrows. And when they hit, they can take down sections of wall.
Shooting ballistas.
They're called the howlers. Like, how sick is that, right? So I was trying to think of the physics. Like, can you imagine an arrow flying at like, Mach speed? I don't know about that fast, but super, super fast. And the amount of weight behind it, and what would it do to stone, and what would it do to armor? It would just mush people on the wall. So, yeah.
When it comes to lit RPG specifically, a lot of times you have people that are very enhanced strength-wise and constitution-wise, I would say, like durability. But strength kind of plays into at least projectiles, right? How fast that's going to go, how much power is behind it, how big you can make a bow that will fire a ballistic into the wall and destroy it. So playing with that's very fun and allows you to, at least what I'm doing, increase the scale and stakes of any particular combat between range, where it would probably be better to get close.
Yeah, I think one consideration that a lot of people, I don't know if this is actually answering the question, but one of the considerations is armor. And I think a lot of people think a sword, I talk about swords a lot because I have a sword store, but that it can cut through steel armor. Generally speaking, it can.
If it has +3 sharpness.
But it has +3 sharpness, it might be able to.
I always think about what's the counter to the weapon, and in terms of the armor, or in some cases, the speed of the person. You can throw something, but the person has the reflexes to evade it and counter. That's how I work the story, is try to figure out where foot placement is. Are they outside the lead foot if they're in close in? If they're at distance, do they have the ability to dodge or defend with armor? And so I don't ever want it to be a one punch or one slice or one thrust or whatever, because that's sort of a boring fight unless you're looking for that shock and awe sort of moment.
When you're waiting through the peons until you get to the boss.
Yes.
All right, so speaking of that, real combat, and like you guys, we have physical therapists and people who do martial arts and things like that. Real combat is very different from written combat. And so if you guys could talk about the challenges of translating combat into a rule of cool form, and how much does that change for you? And also, let's go with that. Let's start there. Anyone?
I guess it's me again.
Whoever wants to take it.
So in terms of combat, I don't like combat that takes pages and pages. I like it to be short and like each individual opponent. It's fast. Most fights, like bar fights, street fights, whatever, they're over in 5 seconds. Because it's whoever lands the first punch is going to generally win it.
Let's test this theory out.
plenty of bar fights on YouTube, and it's over in 5 seconds. So I want it to be short, choppy, and quick. And even if two opponents are generally, well matched, it's still not going to last a long time. And I don't want it to last a long time. It's still going to be a matter of who has that advantage that they can utilize the most effectively.
One of the hardest things for me, coming from a martial arts background, is I always wanted to write these really complex scenes about, they took the wrist, they twisted it this way, they twisted under the arm, and they threw the person, and then bam! But then my beta readers were like, boring. And so focused more on quick, snappy sentences and not really going into the technique as much as what does the person feel about this sword +3 coming at them.
Mine is, there's always a balance of kind of writing both sides well, which can be boring, and sometimes it can kind of enhance a situation. We're talking about that. But then speaking to Bryce's earlier point, rule of cool drives a lot of it. If the scene feels cool, and as long as it's not glaringly wrong or incorrect in how you're kind of proceeding through it, that's the winning formula, at least in my experience.
Yeah, no, and the glaring and the wrong thing is something that has been a conversation I've had with a few people with my stuff, because I made the mistake of not doing enough research into military ranks before I wrote it. Yeah, it's a great one. But yeah, well, a lot of people have yelled at me multiple times. But on the flip side of that, you were talking about the glaringly obvious stuff. Who it is glaringly obvious to depends. But from a PT standpoint, there are limitations of the human body, and it doesn't really. Well, I guess magic is a thing, but depending on the kind of magic you apply, there are still limitations. So I have characters who basically are just superhuman. They don't get stretchy arms, they do anything like that. They just get plus. They get plus.
They're more durable.
They're more durable, but yes, but
But it's not just constitution, you also have to have durability in joints
Yes.
and ligaments and tendons.
Yeah.
Dexterity 17.
But the ligaments and joints is an important aspect, because no matter how high level martial artist you are or how high level an Olympian you are, there are limitations, and keeping those in mind when you're writing combat can result in something that will have a lot less just wait a minute. If you have, no matter what your rule of cool is, if you have hold on a second. For me, that happens a lot in the rehab and the recovery of combat, but it can happen.
We're going to talk about healing next.
I think I'm like a balance of Davis and then also just going way over the top.
I go over the top.
He goes over the top.
I know. You quit interrupting, sir.
Sorry.
I write cultivation. It's not durable enough. I write cultivation, so basically in the magic system, dudes get stronger and stronger. But one of the opening fights, there's a bunch of normie fights where you see people die with one spear thrust, right? You see people lose an arm and they're out of the fight. They don't keep going. Wow, they're just fountain blood. That doesn't make sense. But then they fight one real cultivator that's highly ascendant, and they're just blasting it, and he's just absorbing the hits, and his flesh doesn't get pierced until very late in the thing when his mana or his chi is depleted. And so I think it just depends on where you're at, what kind of batting you're fighting. They weren't really even supposed to be able to beat him, but he was spoiler. Anyway, yeah, you want to go super epic, but I also love the punchy, one-hit, understated, quick over. It's awesome.
Okay, so that leads, again, right into healing. Healing changes everything, and having characters who have if you get stabbed, normally you don't recover very quickly from that. But with magic, you're allowed, and constitution, potions, things like that. It allows you to have these fights where you get trashed and then come back and do it again. Because nobody wants to wait 7 months to heal in a book. So how does that change your fight scenes and how you do things?
Repainting?
Just whatever came, go ahead. Yeah.
So, Azrath Healer is pretty cool. They've got, the combat class is just cracked out. And same thing with, Ivan Call's Legends and Monsters. There's, a type of tank that just doesn't care about damage. They just absorb it and keep regenerating the more people they're fighting or the more kills they get. and they just turn into these like army killing monsters. So healing can change the game if it's as effective as we're gamifying. So it's kind of fun to think about like monsters. It's not as fun for me. It's like we just created a god and now the whole battle's over, but it is devastating to read about.
So it's interesting that you're talking about like it's not as fun for you because the ability for characters to heal faster doesn't change combat too much for me, because if you're gonna do combat, especially in fantasy, I beg of you to have a minimum understanding of human anatomy. Like, I'm not talking about like going to get a degree or anything like that. I'm talking about just like crack open a book, take a look at like, oh, here's the skeletal system, here's the muscle system, here's the nerves, here's all these things, because you will see stuff that's like they took a thrust to the shoulder and then they just kept going. If you take a thrust to the shoulder, like there's a lot going on there, and I'm not going to lecture on that. But the combat itself doesn't actually change too much, but it does allow for the difference of how fast they can get back into it, how fast they can reapproach and re-engage. But the actual combat itself, I've actually found that healing doesn't change it all that much. But I also don't dive into like heavy magic of like endurance and +1 and all that stuff.
Like
so
near instantaneous
yeah,
changes.
yeah. So you guys might have like a better like of the actual type of combat.
Yeah, it certainly changes combat a lot. It does make the actual battle itself, especially if you're providing a person with like a climactic kind of an enemy that is a challenge to them, where it's if there's a threat to their life kind of thing. So the moment of the actual battle, when it comes to recovery, if you have a character that heals really fast, that's less of a thing, right? But for personally, I don't like writing for maybe all characters, because then you have side characters you care about that now have lasting influence, and wounds and stuff, and then it becomes kind of resource management, right? So time. Well, it's basically time. It's potions. It's it's healing magic. It's whatever resources you have to fix those people, and whether that can be achieved.
That's a different RPG category. Yeah.
I don't really have much to say about it because I don't really have healing potions or anything like that. But I would say that it's something common that we do see in popular like media. Like people watch Blue Eyed Samurai on Netflix. I mean, that girl took a lot of damage and she just kept on going. And her healing time was like a week or something. And these are like injuries that would take like months to heal. It's definitely epic. So I mean, I don't know. I think you have to have that balance. Someone who is really injured but keeps on going and going and going, and that is the cool fact of it too. So I don't know. I have to think deeply about that, or maybe not so deeply about it.
I just realized, I think I've read a book by everyone on this panel at least once, so I can, that's cool, I like that. Y'all did well. I guess in terms of healing, it depends on do you need it or not. And that really goes to what kind of story are you trying to tell. And so to Rose's point about a tank just taking punishment, if that's the story you want to tell, then you have to explain why is this person a tank. And sometimes I think what gets glossed over is the psychological impact of harm. And how does that affect you mentally? Can you keep going? Because running backs in the NFL, for instance, they're done, they're cooked at 28, 29 years old. And it's not necessarily because their body's broken, but mentally they can't hit that hole and accept the punishment anymore. It hurts too much. There's one Bengals player I remember, he signed a $1 million contract and quit on the first day of training camp when he took his first hit as a running back. He was done. And that's just the psychological impact. He's 25 years old of taking punishment. So I think if you want to write it effectively, you don't necessarily have to include that, because there are plenty of successful authors out there who don't really bother with that. But you do have to bother with what is the rationale for this person doing this. And it really just boils down to what kind of story are you trying to tell. John was saying, I don't have healing potions. Sometimes you need to have that healing potion so that the person can get back into the fight. So just what are you trying to write is what it boils down to, and include that explanation.
That's like a caveat. None of us actually write power fantasy for how much power fantasy we write. We're a little bit more grounded in realism than I think a lot of the really popular authors that are not in our genre as well. So some people have their character be edgy.
Yeah.
That's why they do stuff. They're like, I got this. And so there's no like depth happening.
No, yeah, I don't love that.
Is that like, you're like, oh, what's happening?
All right, well, we'll go into what annoys you about what annoys you about how like some melee weapons are depicted in books, or how combat is depicted.
Okay.
Alex.
Threw me for a loop there.
Bryce, go.
Wait, no, you can't. Because you had me going in a direction. I was like, what annoys me is about rehab and stuff, and I was like, okay, here's 1,000 answers. And then you threw that at me, and I'm like, oh, okay, I've got an easy one. I'm taking an easy one, guys. If you are drawing a bow and you do not have +1 strength or something, and you are holding that bow for more than like, John, you know better than I would, maybe like
3 seconds.
3 seconds. Like this takes
A lot of effort.
so much effort, and that's why draw and fire is more of the concept of just go. So please make it a crossbow. Anything else? Just anything else.
We think it's cool to have Katniss holding
It's a really loose bowstring.
It was a combat one.
They're still tough. You pull the compound though? Maybe.
But when it pops back, it's so nice.
I don't think anything really annoys me as long as it's as long as it's explained well. And even those power fantasies where they just keep on going and going and going, and 20 pages later you're like, what the hell is this fight going to end? That still doesn't annoy me because again, it just depends on what kind of story you're wanting to write. And so what is right for me doesn't mean that that's wrong. Or what's wrong for me doesn't mean it's necessarily wrong, it was just wrong for me. But I do appreciate when there is some logic involved and it's not just hand waving the entire way across. I'm very forgiving. And again, y'all are the readers of everyone's books, just same as we are. And that just is going to depend on what your comfort level is for the hand waving.
For me, like distance, range, body positioning, like when I'm reading a combat situation, like a fight, and somebody is on one side, and then they do this, and somehow they attack from another side. It's just like, oh, they weren't there. That's a lack of logic. Yeah,
You have
that
6
annoys me.
seconds to take your turn. Sorry.
So, I talk enough, I can't say.
No.
Especially when I'm alone.
I agree with what you said. A lot of times when I'm figuring out a battle scene, I'll default to like a D&D mini table to figure out positioning about where things are. Just for my own reference, I never show it to anybody. Because when it gets really complicated, you're like, I gotta be.
Will you play D&D?
So yes, it comes down to making things as, when things kind of become illogical and come out of nowhere for no particular reason, it's really kind of breaks down immersion in the story itself.
I got 2 things. First off, this is Swords and Sorcery, right?
Yeah.
It should be pole arms in Sorcery. Pole arms rule the battlefield. Okay, it's like a sword on a stick. It's cheap. It doesn't slash. I love writing spears and glaives and all that fun stuff. The second one is, when physics are broken, when you get like a dagger deflecting a warhammer, and you're like, no. You get like the inexperienced dude, it's better when he lifts it up and goes like, I'll block you, and it just collapses in. You're like, the prince is dead.
So I'm actually going to go off the polar. So a lot of the weapons are actually like, it's been proven that the most effective weapon is actually just a big stick. Okay? Like, it's a sharp stick, it's a stick with a rock, but we really like to use fancy, cool weapons, even though they might not actually be more useful than a stick with a rock on the end. So, what are some of the challenges or like things that you like to use even if they might not be like better than a stick with a rock?
I can be quick about this one. Okay, so who's heard of the Zombato blade? The horse killing blade? It wasn't actually used, but it's so sick, and it's kind of like Cloud's Buster Sword is sort of a version.
Yeah.
And the only way it makes any sense is, what if you're 10 times as strong as a normal person? So in one of my smutty books, Towers of Bacalia, the main chick has this big, huge Buster Swordish
Like bigger
hat
than
there. And it's cool because she can like flip it to the side and use it as a shield as well. And that's hot, that's so cool, right? But she has enhanced strength and magic, so we can't use it, but she can wield a, plus it's a sentient sword and it helps her. It's like, let's go, you know?
I mean, you said cool, you used rule of cool earlier. Like, we're up here talking about, like, I'm like, you know, hit someone in the shoulder, make sure you know the anatomy. At the end of the day, do what you want to do, throw everything else out the window, because one of my most popular characters in my series uses giant chain swords. And it's awesome. And, like, they move so fast that, like, he can create, like, a bubble shield around himself with the swords. You can't do that. It's gonna get tied in a knot. I know this. I don't care.
That's why he's got the telekinesis to control them from getting in a knot.
You're right. Oh, wait. Thank you. Okay. That's why he's got the telekinesis, to make sure they don't get in a knot. Anyways. Yeah.
Speaking of actually that same thing, one of my favorite weapons I've had a character use that is very impractical. It's just a spiked chain.
Yeah.
That gets heavier or lighter as they want it to, and they use it to throw themselves across the battle.
Oh, that's so cool. It's like an inertia.
It's an inertia weapon. Yeah, and they tangle some walk with it and slice and bludgeon. But it's great because magic added to it.
Wait, I can do that with my stuff.
That's a really good idea.
Okay. I've learned so much. My work just got a lot easier.
John.
I'm actually still a sword person, and once again, I sell swords, and we get so many comments. We have a pretty big YouTube and TikTok channel, and invariably people are like, "Well, Japanese steel is the best steel ever." We like 1,000 times, but actually, they've done studies of Japanese combat, like of battlefields and wounds, and they found like you were more likely to get killed by a rock than you were by a sword in a Japanese battlefield. And swords are actually very rarely used, but they're still cool, so I still use them. They're cool.
Yeah, I follow the rule of cool on this one. I go with swords.
Swords.
But I also try to, like we were talking about before, about distance control and getting around the pole arms and the big stick. How do they get engaged so that they're close in? Or how do they still engage that person with the sword while they're still far out? So I just think it looks really cool, so that's why I go with it.
Okay, so a lot of the times when we're writing, we have two different combat scenarios, which is individual combat and group combat. And so can you talk about the challenges or favorite things you like about each?
I can dive into that one. So my series specializes mostly in tournament combat, and there's literally dueling team battle war games, which is individual combat, 2 teams against each other, 5 teams against each other. And it's a simple answer. Like, you still dive into. It's interesting because people who write single perspective, it's a little bit trickier because you can't bounce around the battlefield. But if you give yourself the liberty of multi-perspective, you can dive into individual fights, and you can flicker between fights sometimes, and you can do a lot of different things that you couldn't do in a duel. But to answer your actual question, the tactics is so fun, especially when you're not qualified to do tactics. It is so liberating. And then you get colonels in the army being like, "That was cool, but," and you're like, "I know, I'm so sorry." But the tactics really just adds an element of and especially like D&D. Like, I bet you
Speaking of that, writing large group scenes when you're splitting, jumping between side characters, it adds a lot more character to the fight and to the story, because any action scene you're writing has a plot itself, there's a purpose to it. There's a little story going on in every kind of fight you're doing, whether that story is like, oh, one slash they're dead, or if it's more complicated than that. So switching around, and then doing groups is really, really fun, because you can also punch into those other characters and their storylines.
Yeah, and I just say same thing, plotting it out, just know where everybody is when you're writing it out. It leads to all kinds of fun stuff you can work with. Like, if there are arrows flying one way, how is the character going to be engaged with another one at the same time? So it was all fun.
Human shields.
Yeah, I'm just going to say I agree with all of that.
That's pretty much what I wanted to say too.
But in terms of rule of cool, that's a cool one. That's a nice phrase. I like that. I write a lot of one-on-one fights, but I also write a lot of team combat and battles. I guess I write them all, and I'm not qualified to write any of it either. but I do, and try to make it work. One of the things that I appreciate about battle scenes from other authors is when they get into the head of a peon, and it lets you, as the reader, really experience how cool and awesome that main character is. You know, when they're laying waste to, you know, hundreds of people, and the little peon is like, holy crap, this is awful, and we're getting our butts handed to us. But I love that, because I like that, you know, to cheer for that hero. So I like those kind of scenes as on a personal note, and I try to write some of that. And then, like Bryce was talking about with tactics, it's fun to try to figure that out, even if you're not qualified, because it stretches your writing chops and your brain. And so I like to do that as well, and move around in terms of who's witnessing the battle and what they're experiencing.
Talking about the writing chops too, this is a little bit off topic, but especially if you are interested in writing, everybody knows, raise your hand if you've heard show, don't tell. Okay, thank you. Team tactics is an incredible place to show the development of relationships and show the development of like interpersonal, just kind of connections. Someone saves someone on the battlefield, you do not have to say, they know how to build a relationship. You know. But you can also do like individual dynamics where someone, you can do more complex dynamics where someone saves someone on the battlefield and goes, what the hell are you doing? Like, get up. And then you actually add contention to that relationship.
Why weren't you there?
Yeah, like there's all kinds of stuff that you can do, and it's one of the simpler, I think I'm just realizing this as we're talking about this, it's one of the simpler and more direct places to just like, you write a chapter of combat, and by the end of that chapter, you may have done more building, damage, whatever you were trying to do, than if you had written 2 chapters of, here's how this person feels, like so.
Yeah, and if you don't do character development in every battle, you're not writing good. So you gotta work that in. Otherwise, I mean, it could be awesome. Awesome's cool, but it should be, you see doubt overcome, or you see alliance getting deeper. I want to go back to the question. Real quick. I don't have time. You mentioned resource management, right?
Yeah.
So it's really cool when you get big battles when both sides have lots of magic. So in like Wheel of Time and Sword of Truth series by the Kang, who's kind of a trash person or whatever. You get a couple situations where the mages on both sides are so equally pitted that they serve the function of neutralizing each other.
Yeah.
And then it's a grind. And no one wants a grind because it lasts a long time and people are dying from starvation, a bunch of other stuff. And then you get weird kind of like clever hacks where there was a battle in Sword of Truth series that was really disgusting. And the wizards wanted to save their mana because you're going to run out. That's the only thing to manage it. And they ground up a bunch of glass and they threw it up on the breeze. And the entire enemy army, like 30,000 people, lost their eyes and were bleeding and their lungs were bleeding. And then they waited like a few hours and then murdered them. And I was like, oh my God. It was brutal. Too bad he's a misogynist.
So,
Don't read his books.
all right, so
Sorry, nice.
my brain just fell and lost her guess. Okay, so there is a difference again between how you fight your enemies, and there's a lot of, I know a lot of us use monsters, not everyone maybe, but how is fighting humans different from like fighting a bunny horn where they're only a foot high? Or like what monsters do you like to use, and how does that make your fight scenes different, fighting human versus non-human enemies?
I think this goes back to actually Rose's point about character growth. It's if you're having your overpowered main character fight low-level, weaker characters, you're not really doing much except they're going through the grind of killing a bunch of nothings. And that doesn't really, I don't think as a reader that's really appealing. I don't think as a writer that would be very fun either, because it doesn't really grow your character. And by growth, it doesn't have to be of it becoming more powerful. It's, again, like Rose said, it's overcoming certain aspects, certain flaws, or certain attributes that hold them back from their full potential. So where they are in their combat life is sort of going to dictate what you want to do, or at least I hope so. And sometimes you can have them being really overconfident and going up against something that's too much for them and getting it handed to them. That's growth. Maybe it teaches them a little bit of doubt and self-preservation.
Rose is so smart. She's been saying
Rose
great
is so
things.
smart.
I'm gonna briefly build off that because you were talking about growth and overconfidence. Another thing that you can do with that is continue to build on what you are doing with the character. So if you have a character who has succeeded against all these humans, it should be a different challenge. There should be more, but like it's approached in a different way. And I'm not going to actually answer your question because I can't think of a good answer off the top of my head. But by presenting them with a new challenge after they have done all these things and then overcoming it, you can layer on in a new way more effectively exactly what you were trying to build, just as you can just shift the direction and tear something down in a positive way.
I would say, to that same point, just building off everything, it's also, when you have a monster, especially if you have monsters that are lower, kind of lower threats, lower complication, but if that character runs into early on, and then they can run into it again later, using that as a character development as well as their development
It's the kid kind of
sort of
rationale. I get to
their
run, I'm
assurance,
good enough to
their
kill it.
confidence, and everything like that, as a which is much more useful obviously with monsters because it's not, you can have every monster kind of be the same.
Yeah.
Whereas obviously ransom, you can do it I guess with a group of thieves that gotta beat you up and then you run into them later. It's how every 80s movie story kind of ends. You get the bully at the end of the movie. But yeah.
Yeah, I'm sort of like wrapping my head around this because it's kind of interesting in terms of training to fight, and we're only training against humans, and humans only work but certain ways. They have a certain reach, and they have certain places where you can hit. And as you're thinking, it's like trying to fight. Like I was just thinking about Christians being fed to the lions in Rome. It's like, man, even if they had weapons, that would not be a very
How do you kill a lion?
yeah. How do you kill that? Yeah, and I'm sorry, I'm having deep thoughts. Maybe not so deep thoughts.
That's a really good. That's really good. The chaos of it, because you don't train to fight a lion. Like you train to fight a human, and the scene itself is,
So we know why the knights in Monty Python and the Holy Grail couldn't beat Bunny.
The bunnies will kill you.
That sounded more like a threat.
That's how we-
Put the bunny down.
Anybody bring the holy hand grenade?
So in one of my smutty series, I wrote Savage Ascension. The dude gets like captured and thrown into an arena, and he survives like the first like Indian round, and then he gets put up against a fort, which is like a frost ape that's like 16 feet tall, and everyone's super excited to watch him get pulled to pieces because that's what happens. But he's like, cool, it's been a few years since I've hunted one of these, let's do it. And he gets, he picks his own weapon, and he gets this big, weird, awkward cleaver, because that's all he needs. And he starts by like bringing the animal down, right? And he goes for tendons on the ankle, and then he goes behind the knee, and he slowly and methodically butchers this beast, and everyone's like, it just happened. And he's like, here goes, it's a waste of an animal, and he cuts its head off, and we're like, oh, so I guess you can. So I just try to think about like the physics of fighting a big thing, and you either have the character be able to do it or not, and both are fun depending on how you do it. That's awesome.
Absolutely.
All right, I've got one more question and then we'll open it up to the audience. But what is a book? I mean, everyone on this panel has amazing fighting books. You should really read them. They do great jobs. But what is one book that you think does magical combat really well that you would recommend people read? It's not your own.
So we're talking about magic weapons or magic and weapons?
Magical combat, anything?
Do you want to? Can we go wide? Does that have to be individual or?
No, go for it.
Has anybody here not read Temporary? Because if you have, then
Temporary?
Yes.
I love you.
Yes. Okay. So
It's dragons with Jane Austenian like
it is
humor.
It is amazing.
It's cute.
Napoleonic Wars with Dragons, and Naomi Novik. Naomi Novik basically recreated some of these wars, and she's like, and dragons. And she does it incredibly well in how they interact. It's not just like the dragons overpower everything. There's different dragons and there's tactics and all this stuff. But for the love of God, read Temporary. It's also it's the misogynistic character, and then you see the like no comment, and then you see the like over time the character over 9 books is like, oh, this is how women work in the military. And this is like what like it's so good. Yeah.
It's not magic combat necessarily, but in Wheel of Time, I've always liked how Robert Jordan did sword combat for their sword masters because it was very, it wasn't a blow by blow, they were just named, so just like the name of the movement, herring, parts of the reeds, things like that. And it was a very great way to kind of intimate an elegance and a grace to the movement without having to break them.
I'm going to go for a super obscure book, Lord of the Rings. Actually, I'm kidding. I'm actually going to go for Six of Crows. I don't know. That's actually my favorite fantasy cover by Lee Bardugo. And they have, I can't remember his name, even though it's my favorite book ever. He's the shooter. He's the one who shoots. And he talks about how
He's hot too.
he's super. He's super.
He's a icon, baby.
Yeah. So yeah, I thought they did combat really well.
He's so hot.
David? Or Rose?
Good stuff. My brain isn't working very well right now, so I apologize. It's not necessarily that the combat is accurate or likely or even workable, but the writing itself carries the story so well that I forgive it all of the flaws of a person wielding two swords. Kind of silly, but I love it because that character is just amazing, and you can't imagine him doing anything but wielding two swords like a lunatic, and that's Rage of Dragons.
Yes.
Say it again?
Evan Winter, Rage of Dragons.
Rage of Dragons, and he's not magical about it. He just suffers to become as good as he does. He suffers in the sense that he goes to hell and is killed in hell thousands of times every single night. He goes there, and it's not a true death; it's a spiritual death, but it feels like real death. And because of that, and because he's a psychopath, he becomes extremely skilled with two swords, which again, I forgive because the rest of it is just phenomenal.
Jumping back to your point about mental toll, that was really a thing that Evan did incredibly well.
Yes.
Like it was quick because TAU, yeah. The mental toll was just like done incredibly well. Like how that character changed just over that suffering, over that trauma, and it carried through the end of that book, and it affects the characters and the relationships, and they have concerns about his rehab and his recovery. That book is really good.
Sanderson's epic, but I'd say skip Stormlight. That's kind of like it's too polished. It's so polished, it's clean. But like Mistborn and Alloy of Law are really weird and cool magic systems. Like flicking bullets through someone's head from 100 yards away is super fun. That's just really neat. And also, dude, you don't fully get to understand what's happening, but fighting with personal shields and needing to move slow, and it's like playing chess with knives, right? When they're doing knife-on-knife duels. If you read Herbert's work, he's a master. I also got to study his manuscript in college. His raw manuscript. Check it out.
Sorry, I have one more question for you guys. What is one piece of advice you would give for magical combat, and one resource for people who are looking to write it?
Have a lot of fun. That's probably the best. If you're enjoying it, your readers will too. And then your readers are your best resource. Find someone that thinks you're dumb, that likes you, and they'll just cut into you, and you're like, yeah, okay, I'll make it cool.
For me, it's the rehab thing. Ask people if you don't know about rehab, or if you're concerned about how you injure people and their recovery. But my recommendation is going to have nothing to do with that. It's going to have to do with find the mediums that you like and the combat that you like. My stuff is heavily inspired by anime, but I have played more hours than Elden Ring allows you to play. And if you want to try different weapons and stuff, I love Elden Ring, but I watch a ton of anime, and that's where I inspire my super realistic combat.
My big advice is usually, depending on how you're writing, the particular subgenres and genres you're writing in fantasy, but rule of cool is big, while also maintaining that line of believability, because it's way too easy to push past it, and it's just all kind of becomes mush, and kind of maybe towing that line is where I like to be personally. And resource advice, there's a ton ton of resources of people on YouTube and TikTok that are experts with level of study, way more than we have, that I'd love to go check out constantly. So those are always good to scroll around and look at.
Yeah, for me, I'll just co-sign that and just say find something that you really like to watch or read. And for me, it was like Wuxia stories, like Once Upon a Time in China, and watching those and watching that combat that sort of borders on the line of realistic and unrealistic. And in terms of resources, same thing. Man at Arms, or not Man at Arms, Robin Swords over on YouTube. It's a lot of fun to stuff.
I think that's pretty much would be my advice as well. Whatever you like to read that has combat in it, and you're wanting to write combat, and you happen to read something like, oh, that was a great scene. I would kind of study that scene, like how did they structure the sentences? How fast was the combat? And what was, or if you find something you don't like, try to figure out what was it that you didn't like about it. So you kind of have to become a studious reader in that regard. And that would be my advice for that, is study what you're reading and enjoying it. Study what you didn't like about something so you can avoid it.
All right, now I'm going to do one piece of advice too. Know your magic system bounds. Like, know the upper power limit levels of where you're going, so that you know where you can like progress to, and how to make it so that you're just not overpowering enemies and there is no equal for you. Because it's kind of boring to read. Oh, I just killed everyone. So, okay, we're going to open it up to questions now. So if you have a question, please come up to this mic. Make order design, and remember, question, not comment. Quick, question.
Go. All right. As an artist, words paint pictures. I see in my mind what I'm reading. So, do you use historic military tactics or historic actualities in your writings, and do you use tabletop designs to form your tactics for your battles? Thank you.
I partially answered that before. I do that for tabletop stuff for figure-out placement and things, but I also do some research on if it's happening in like an open field and how the terrain might affect things to a certain extent. But I also see everything in pictures. It's all a movie in my head. Okay, so it has to make sense.
Lightning round, yeah, lightning round, go.
What are your thoughts on weapons or armor that don't necessarily deal with dealing more damage or preventing more damage? Like I feel like fantasy gets a little caught up in just hitting harder or taking more hits. Like I liked what you said about the guy that uses the inertia of the chain to tie people up. Like I thought that was really interesting. Like I remember reading somewhere that there was a
Question, not comment.
Oh, sorry. Like weapons that like you can't feel fear. Like what are your thoughts on things
This is
like
a
that?
fun one. Yeah, I think if you're not playing with those other options, then you're really not you're not doing what you should be doing. Like a spear that increases bleeding factor by like 300%. Imagine how devastating that would be, right? Or I like speed enhancement or dexterity enhancement. It seems much more valuable than just damage output or endurance. So yeah, you should definitely be doing weird stuff. Weird hacks.
I'm going to add to that if you can. I totally agree depending on the space that you're working in, but technically my stuff is like realistic sci-fi. I love to try my best with like the chain swords and all that stuff, but if you can, then absolutely, that stuff is so cool.
Go.
So, when writing combat and the tension in it, basically you're edging your audience. Do you guys have any rules of thumb that you go for how much tension to pay off you're looking, or is it all by feel?
For me, it's feel. This is a question that a couple people have asked me before, and I regret that the answer is like, it's a gut thing. But you can develop that gut thing. I did an entire write-up of like, writing is as much a skill as it is a talent, and the more you read and the more stuff you take in that you like, you will hone that field, but regrettably, it's not something, maybe someone else can be like, this is my thing, I have this mathematical equation.
I don't use math, I use gut feel for it.
Yeah.
That's just because it's an emotional genre.
Gut feelings for the edge.
Make sure they have stakes. Like, if there are no stakes, there's not a good,
And an editor.
editor can be that good.
You mentioned about your background in martial arts. I'd like to ask this for all of you. What martial arts did you study to add in your books?
So I've never done martial arts except Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I concussed myself. Got a cauliflower ear that I had to rapidly drain, so my wife didn't see it. And that was the end of that. So that was it, but I actually do watch, I watch YouTube videos like a fiend about the mind of a warrior, the mind of a fighter. And there's lots of them out there, and it's almost, they enter a fight almost in a state of, they're irrational, like they think they can win, and everybody else is like, no, you can't win, but they believe it, and that's what I've studied.
John, what did you study?
I mean, my main thing is Wing Chun Kung Fu.
Oh, I'm Jeet Kune Do.
Oh, okay, awesome.
Okay, I think he was the one who did it. Okay, go.
You kind of mentioned this, it's really easy when you have a magic system for magic to just be the auto win. So what kind of limitations or details do you guys build in so that weapon skill and battle tactics still actually matter?
I'm in lit RPG, so it's all just, there's like numbers involved, and so you should be calculating your actual limits, and it's also resource management. So just because someone can blast the first 10% of the soldiers or the monsters away, and they have nothing left in the tank after they die super quick. So you just have to balance it with that.
All magic should have a cost.
And choose cool baddies to go against.
Yes.
I'm also going to lean back into the tactics thing, like even in a dual thing, like a stronger opponent can lose to a weaker opponent if they approach the fight. I mean, that's an entire martial arts aspect, is like the ability, yeah, so tactics sounds good. Yeah.
Next.
When you have something special or uniquely cool, how do you dance around the issues of proliferation?
Can you explain? Yeah, what do you mean? Everyone having the same cool thing.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Well, if it's the main character, a lot of times it's like, well, they're the main character for a
First
reason,
session.
right? So they are kind of special. It depends on what it is. But yeah, if you introduce a new metal that now a whole bunch of people have, I mean, that just is a matter of managing some new stakes, right? You increase the stakes, and now it's, there needs to be a new factor to kind of tip the balance.
I co-sign that. That's
All right, go ahead.
How do you determine the amount of gore that you show?
Oh gosh.
That's up to you. That's kind of like
And your
how much
audience, your
sex,
target audience.
And your audience.
how much sex do you show, right?
A lot of it.
I like that.
With gore.
Read John's book for the
I
sex.
do want to add one thing, if that's okay. I'm a vet, so I think that if you're going to have fun with violence, I feel like there's a tiny bit of responsibility there. So I usually show the cost. It isn't that fun to murder. So, so yeah, I like to have it be awesome and then be like, ugh, you know, so both.
I tend to do the same thing,
Yeah.
but it's up to you on how to do that so that it's, like Rose is saying, that there is a cost to it, there's a feel to it.
And there's slightly less trauma from murdering animals or monsters than there is humans. Go.
You talked a little bit about plot, and every fight should have a bit of plot in it. I've always been curious for the writers. Do you guys think of a really cool fight scene first, or you think of this is what a problem that I want my character to resolve to help them progress first, which was like chicken and egg kind of thing?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, whoa.
I'm so good.
We're also original.
I think that also sort of delves into, are you a plotter or a pantser?
Yeah.
In some ways, and sometimes you're both. You're plotting, yeah, you're a planter, you're plotting your story. You get to the fight scene, you know what you're trying to say, but you have no idea how to say it, and you're just kind of making it up on the spot. At least that's how I know things.
What advice would y'all have to build the small step to a larger confrontation where the hero would meet the villain, but you have to have those small steps to be there because they can't just immediately be there at the cool fight. They've got to have the adventure, but it's a lot of smaller things. But how do you make that more exciting where it's not they went to this town, they did this quest, if that makes sense?
I think that depends a little bit on the villain and the hero.
Depends on the hero. It's a lot of it is foreshadowing. It's seeing things. It's if you have a villain that is running a crime family running into minions, right? And then it leads up to a final confrontation.
And the character grows to us.
I have a bully that they literally like meat toasted around the corner and hit each other. So you can foreshadow, you can set that up, but it depends a little bit on the villain. What do you guys?
I was just going to say, it's intentionality, really. It's, you want the hero to meet the villain, and you have to intentionally get him to meet the villain. But it can't just be show up, and that takes thought. You just have to figure out what you need to tell, what you need in that story to get there.
And then any injuries suffered along the way take time to heal.
Yeah.
Unless you have medical
Technically, you can have a tower with a bunch of sub-bosses, and you can try harder when you get injured. So that's a possibility.
That's intentionality.
Just
sounds like
try
my
harder. Ignore the pain. Work through it. Rub some dirt on it.
Is it raid redemption?
I appreciate that.
So intense.
Go.
What's your approach when you have a hero who's used to fighting with weapons, and then all of a sudden has to face them without?
I mean, that's kind of similar to what we were talking about with the monster.
I know, it's the monster, but the monster's one thing. The Luke Skywalker being dropped into that pit is the old standby for that, and
Right.
facing a monster. But if you're facing another human being,
And you don't have your weapon.
and the weapons you normally fight with, the weapons that are personal, all of a sudden you're without
They got
them.
thrown in jail without their weapon.
The question comes from a Japanese style of fighting called muto, where you have to learn to fight without a weapon because you may be deprived of it. But I've tried putting my head to that. I'm a writer myself, and I've tried putting my head into that. And how would you do that? And I was wondering what y'all would say.
I think you're not just going to screw around and say, oh, I lost my weapon, you have a weapon, I'm going to die. I mean, everyone's going to have
a backup.
Yeah. By the way, this is Walt Muscle. He writes some awesome Japanese historical fantasy. Or sorry,
It
Japanese
should
historical
be a
fiction.
character development moment too. Like Batman falls, he's like, I was born in the darkness. That man loses and then he wins. So like he's thrown into an environment he's not good at, and then he's got to like change stuff inside of him to get better. So you got to make it a character moment, I think.
Absolutely, and again, that what are you trying to accomplish with that scene? You know, you're depriving your main character of his weapon. Why? So there has to be a purpose to that scene.
Okay, that makes. I know from the scene I was trying to write it was survival.
Okay, we're almost done. Dylan, super fast.
So, we've talked about kind of cool weapons, cool magic, stuff like that. How do you guys keep the ramp up of those things getting like better and better and more powerful with armor? And kind of, in the lit RPG scene it's a little bit easier, but in traditional fantasy, how do you keep your armor good enough to keep up with the weapons that are constantly getting better, the magic that's constantly getting better?
So one trick is you can show what the maximum is in some other character. And so the main character witnesses it, or something along those lines, or there's a story about it, and then you know what your upper limit is.
All right, we're gonna have to stop there. Where can we find you?
Facebook, Discord, online, buy books. It's on sale.
The easiest place to find me is probably on our subreddit, it's Art More Fun. I'm on there daily and I chat with people all the time. So.
Easiest place to find me is on my website, Nicoli.com.
Facebook, JC Kang.
Facebook or my website, davisashura.com.
Facebook, jboyce.com, or Amazon. Cool. Thank you guys for coming.